Hello, patrons. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations.
Have so thoroughly enjoyed your feedback to our guest host last time on the podcast. And today, I'm really excited about all of the current events that have been happening recently in the our side of the Cosmere, the reader side of the Cosmere, the real world. And I did put that heavily in quotations. It's been a busy springtime for everyone over here in the fandom.
Yeah, we just wrapped up the crowdfunding campaign for Words of Radiance Letherbound. And of course, there was a surprise announcement that there is a fifth secret project coming out next year. That's 2025. Hopefully the first half is the thought. So February, March-ish of 2025. The book is titled Isles of the Emberdark.
And we have had actually snippets of this story before we knew that it was going to be part of Isles of the Emberdark.
I mean, I think before Brandon knew it was going to be part of this book.
So we have often referenced the short reading Brandon did about a potential sequel to Six of the Dusk, and in that, it's far future Cosmere with the Scadrians and Rasharans making a scene on First of the Sun. It's been a huge moment of speculation. We see the shard gun for the first time. We see and are able to imagine different types of space travel for each of those two groups that arrives. And we also get to revisit with Dusk. We've now learned that that has been incorporated into the Isles of the Emberdark, because this is going to be a dual narrative book with flashback sequences as well.
The short story is going to be a flashback. So that puts us at an interesting situation. Yeah, with the timeline. The story itself, the dual narratives are happening really far in the future of the Cosmere, to the point where the flashback in that book is going to be what we would already consider to be really far future Cosmere.
Exactly. So we're kind of like doubling up the length of time, and we do not know what that length of time is, but we are now flashing back to the sequel scene of Six of the Dusk. And so from this point on, we are not going to refer to that scene as the sequel of Six to the Dusk. It will always now be referred to as a flashback within Isles of the Emberdark.
These two narratives are from the perspectives of a new character, Starling, who is a dragon and Frost's niece. Frost, famous friend of Hoid. She is his niece. And then the second character who has a viewpoint is Dusk, who we already know and love.
Certainly, and want to learn as much as possible, because Dusk was a character that we've only seen in a short story. To get more with them is really great, but then you could barely contain your excitement last time we were talking with Jen Neal about how important dragons were going to be to the far future of the Cosmere. And this is why Starling, a dragon in human form, and we will talk all about kind of what we learn from the short reading that Brandon did, but it is another example mixed in with what Brandon talked about during the Dragonsteel 2023 spoiler Q&A, where he's making a lot of different hints at dragons, suggesting some relationships that Hoid might have had with dragons, all pointing to a dragon-focused future of the Cosmere.
Well, clearly they've been big players in the Cosmere the whole time. They are around as vessels. Frost was present in some way, like knows about the shattering and converses with Hoid about it all the time. And I believe that they are one of the main races species,
yeah.
On Yolen.
Exactly.
So the closer we get to the Yolen stories and Dragonsteel, the novel, the more dragon stuff we're going to get, which has already been increasing quite a bit. And I'm really excited to finally get a dragon main character that we know is a dragon.
That we can absolutely confirm is a dragon.
Exactly. Like,
Brandon's...
who knows what else is going to come out? But at this point, this is the first character that we have confirmed they are a dragon. That dragonness is going to play a significant role in the story. We're going to learn about dragon culture, it seems, which is very exciting.
And before we talk more about the characters, let's talk about the setting. The Emberdark. Brandon actually had this to say about it. Quote, "You might be able to find the word Emberdark used somewhere in the previous books. It's been around for a little while. I've been imagining this place between populated parts of Shadesmar as a very interesting darkness to explore. And we are going to have a book that maybe looks at that a little bit." End quote.
Very cool idea that this is a region of Shadesmar.
Yeah, and if you happen to know which book got the mention of Emberdark, you let us know in the comments, because we, off the top of our head, I don't think have called it. We have to look up things secondarily, and that happens all the time. But in this one, I was not able to remember a specific mention of Emberdark.
I feel like this would have jumped out to me
It's
while
a
I was
strange
reading.
phrase.
So I'm confused as why I don't remember this being anywhere. But obviously there's a lot that goes on in these books and we can't remember everything.
Yeah, so give a shout out to where Emberdark is seen before we get the Isle of the Emberdark in the comments.
And here is a little bit more of a description about the concept of Emberdark. Brandon said, quote, "The idea for Emberdark is there is this vast darkness out there, but there are points out there of interest and dim light. And they know that there's a lot still out there. It's not just complete blackness, but it's mostly blackness. That's what it's meant to imply." End quote.
And if I was one of these maybe very old Cosmere characters, a dragon myself, I think that a bright point of interest, or maybe a spot that I carved out within the Emberdark, would be a great place to hide from some of the chaos of these new shards. Because while it's not confirmed, and I don't necessarily think it's true with the character that's introduced of Starling, many of the dragons we do have to assume are very, very old, potentially older than the Shattering, and might have a good understanding of, hey, something crazy just happened, I'm going to go hide and kind of take myself out of the direct influences of all these new baby shards who are running around on different planets. And so the Emberdark, to me, would seem like a good place to chill out and kind of like be able to escape some of the madness. But it is also seen as an area of blackness, darkness, unexplored lands.
Yeah, so I guess we'll find out what's out there. When we talked to Jen, we were pretty interested in the potential future of spaceships in the Cosmere, and the reading of some sample chapters that Brandon shared on his YouTube channel had some quotes about the future of spaceships in the Cosmere. Do you want to talk us through what we learned about space technology?
Yes, because as you said last time, we were kind of discussing what's the eventual dream. I said I wanted them to get to a Star Trek future where everybody was cooperating together, building really awesome ships. And I think Jen and you were both a little skeptical that would be happening anytime soon, but maybe a nice dream. We now get a little bit more insight directly from the text. We have this, quote, "The old machinery needed constant attention. The dynamic, as fond as Starling was of it, wasn't exactly the most cutting edge of ships. Indeed, it was something of a mongrel. Risharan anti-grav technology, Datrian aethers for providing thrust and engine power, a Scadrian composite metal hull. Never mind that all three technological strains had produced their own viable ships without the others." End quote.
So it's both. It's both and, which I think is fairly predictable, that each culture, each society created their own spaceships, and then to some extent, as the cosmos starts to, I want to say globalize, but that's
Yeah,
too
yeah.
small of a word. Universalize,
There you
I
go.
suppose.
Mhm.
The technologies come into contact with each other, and we do see that in ships like the Dynamic, there are a multitude of different magic systems being used for their unique benefits.
Yes, and we definitely did speculate on like how those technological combinations could end up. And here we have some of the answers. Anti-grav technology from Rashar, metal composites for the hull from Scadrial, but of note, Datrian, that is not Lumarian, which is our focus last time,
Right.
was really pinpointed on talking about Lumar, but instead we get another mention, maybe speculation, from one of the prime Aether planets.
Yes, I believe that is correct. Daughtry is the prime Aether planet. Brandon sort of answered this at Dragonsteel during a question. He was like waiting for the world building document from his team. A few members of his team put together the world building document for this planet. It is going to be based on Earth, Indian culture and history, and Brandon doesn't have a lot of experience in that area, and so he had experts in Indian culture and mythology help him build a world inspired by that culture. So he attempted to give us the name of the prime Aether planet at Dragonsteel. I think he pronounced it incorrectly, but here we have it officially recognized.
Yeah.
Daughtry.
And I do think we saw some of those influences in Twinsoul, which right
Yes.
now is the only person we can say with confidence is a user and bonded to one of the prime Aethers.
Yes.
Brandon also remarked that Isles of the Emberdark would be similar to the Lost Metal in its Cosmere awareness and its recognition of the other cultures and societies, to kind of give like a similar vibe or understanding of where he was going with this thought process.
And the Sunlit Man, in terms of the number of like Cosmere cameos and integration of all the different Cosmere worlds.
Yeah, so maybe a little less like Tress and a little bit more like the Sunlit Man.
Yeah, my impression is it's going to be much more explicit in the crossovers. Brandon said he wouldn't necessarily recommend this one as a standalone or as your first foray into the Cosmere, because it is going to be quite integrated.
And while Starling's ship, the Dynamic, is using all of these different technologies, she's also saying very clearly it is not a cutting edge ship. So the best version of everything is maybe still being kept isolated to the different planets. And then the secondary technologies are the things that get spread out and maybe shipped to others.
Maybe, or there are just other composite ships that are newer, fancier, etc. I think this is maybe just a reflection of where Starling is at, in that she doesn't have the clout or the money or status, whatever, to be on one of the fanciest ships. It's kind of more of a Firefly.
Yes, definitely more of a Firefly, a Serenity.
Or a Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, just a junk hauler
Yeah.
that is strangely able to go much faster than all the other ships when need be. But I think that it is just still a question of how and when are the different societies sharing technology. I was kind of putting forward the idea that a composite would be the best possible version, where it looks like
I think it still might be.
it still might be.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think that there is probably a couple of levels, as you were saying, with the ship, the Serenity from Firefly. It is a little bit of a junk hauler that Starling might be on. And the true top tier, most impressive weapons or technology in the ship is either A, very, very expensive, or B, the technology could still be withheld from travel.
Yeah, like military only or something.
Exactly. And you just don't give the best possible secrets to everyone.
Sure. Shall we dive into some words of Brandon in regards to this secret project?
Yeah, I've got my swim cap on and I am ready to do a backflip off the high dive, because not only did we get the reading, we also get some questions from the spoiler Q&A. And here's a bunch of new words of Brandon coming at you.
First question. Is Starling one of Hoyd's previously listed apprentices?
Brandon responds, quote, yes. When I wrote that line into a different book, one of the primary people I was referencing was Starling. She's been in the works for many, many, many years. Just like, when can I find a place? And this book really clicked for me when I started doing the dual narrative. I wrote this book across many years, chapters here, chapters there, but the momentum really started when I added Starling to it. And that's when it really came together, end quote.
So a new Hoyd apprentice, or rather an old Hoyd
the
apprentice.
Oldest of Hoyd's apprentice.
Yeah, I think I'm unclear on when precisely she becomes Hoyd's apprentice, because she is quite young when we first meet her. And obviously we don't have the entire book yet, so I'm not totally sure where that scene with her falls in context of the timeline and the greater Cosmere. I suppose if this is a line from a book, I'm going to be honest, I don't really know what is being referenced here in terms of Hoyd's two apprentices or like previously listed apprentices. So I don't know if this is in a book or if it's just a word of Brandon. If it was in a book, then obviously she's an apprentice before Sigil. If it's just a word of Brandon, it could be any time.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that we have a good understanding of the timeline, but we can be pretty confident in Starling's life cycle as a dragon in human form that is specifically talking about the upcoming date of transformation. And we had learned at the Dragonsteel convention that dragons in the Cosmere mate and are born in a human form. And our assumption now with what we've learned about Starling is that human form as kind of a growing period or a kind of maturing period of something like 30 years in their human form before they are, I don't know if it's capable or allowed to culturally transform into...
I think it's capable.
Right. That's kind of like, I learn a lot more about dragons and kind of how they operate, but I am not 100% convinced yet if it's only a capable thing or if it's just like a culturally reinforced thing, in the same way that many human societies have markers and transition events between a childhood state and a adult state.
Yeah.
This would kind of be the marker for dragons, is like, now you are a fully exemplified version of yourself, capable of both being a human and a dragon at will, as far as I am aware.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about the dragon culture in this book.
Here's question number 2. Is this the furthest forward that we have seen in the Cosmere?
Brandon's response, quote, I intend this to be just a little after Sunlit Man, which was our furthest forward at this point. So this is just a little bit forward, but it's kind of in the same era.
Follow-up question. Is Yumi further than the Sunlit Man?
Oh, yeah. Yumi is further than Sunlit Man. The question is this further than Yumi? And I do think that it is. Yumi technically is further than Sunlit, which is a good point. It doesn't feel like it because it's taking place on a world that's not as technologically advanced, but technically it is. Good catch. End quote.
This was another huge point of conversation on our last episode, is trying to place Tressa of the Emerald Sea in the timeline. And we've gotten a couple of like misleading or misdirection words of Brandon about the timeline. Here, it's made very explicit. So now we have a new understanding of the timeline. The Sunlit Man, then Yumi, then Isles of the Emberdark.
Seemingly, they would be relatively close in time. It sounds like he's saying that Isles of the Emberdark is just a little bit forward of Sunlit Man. And so if Yumi is in the middle there, they're all happening relatively close together. But this really surprised me. We've had a lot of conversations about the timeline and where these secret projects fall in the timeline. And I completely assumed, as Brandon referenced there, that Yumi was before the Sunlit Man, because it is happening in a very different world that feels closer in the timeline, and Sunlit Man feels so futuristic and so far forward. I think because it has more characters that we've seen before, and a lot more integrated Cosmere cameos and stuff. So I just assumed that Yumi was first. I'm very surprised to learn that Yumi is after Sunlit.
It also helps with our understanding, because we were talking about design and that relationship with Hoid. Are they always linked? Do they always need to be together? Where was design in Tress? But if Isles of the Emberdark, Yumi, and the Sunlit Man are all, we'll say, in the same general era, then that also means that the far future of the Cosmere, and with Six of the Dusk being a member who is having flashbacks in the Isles of the Emberdark, we can place Six of the Dusk prior to that era. You know, it has to be before whatever era Isles of the Emberdark. And then we have a question of like, okay, well, where does Six of the Dusk fall compared to, let's say, Stormlight Archive 5?
Ooh, yeah, I don't know if we have that confirmed yet. My guess would be it's after Stormlight 5, because seemingly the Scadrians are arriving with technology, etc., that we don't see them possess yet in the Scadrial stories we currently have.
I definitely agree. And I think that it's after Stormlight Archive 5, and it's a question of like how far after.
Yeah, it's maybe Stormlight 5, Mistborn Era 3, then Sixth of the Dusk.
Yeah, and it's kind of a question of like how quickly do the Scadrians advance from an Era 3 to an Era 4, where they could be conceivably traveling physically through the Cosmere.
True, because I guess Era 4 is supposed to be the space age.
Yeah, but we don't know what that means. It could be the space age of a very technologically advanced race, and they had a more basic ship long before the like super advanced era that Brandon could be talking about for Era 4.
Yeah, that still seems more likely to me, that it would be Era 3, Era 4, then 6th.
And then a time gap getting them to the next era, which would then put it into the Sunlit Man, Yumi, Isle of the Emberdark.
Right.
We know that was a lot.
We talk about such huge scopes of time when we're talking about the Cosmere.
It's really difficult to keep things together, especially when we have characters that we're also following through those multiple eras, living longer than they otherwise should.
Theoretically, after Stormlight 5, Brandon has said he is committing to publishing an official Cosmere timeline,
which will help out our speculation quite a bit and really give us some strong waypoints to understand new stories as they come up and as things are dropped. But I also love the speculation. I love trying to put things on a timeline. So much fun.
Next question, is Chris in the secret project?
Brandon says, quote, "That's definitely a Raffo, but Nas is there, so who knows?" But Nas has had a lot of different adventures with a lot of different people through a lot of different places. Nas, we should point out, is Isaac's character that I'm borrowing for this book with Isaac's permission and understanding. You can look forward to a lot more Nas with Isaac and his things. He's on loan, shall we say. End quote.
So fun.
Boatload of mummies!
Yeah, boatload of mummies when? Come on.
That is rumored to be Isaac's development in the Cosmere, and we think that it will be incorporating Nas as a main player.
And obviously Nikki Savage.
Of course.
Who can forget Nikki Savage?
Never forget Nikki Savage, the one and only. I think that incorporating Chris, more of the 17th Shard, more of kind of these, I'm not going to say mythical, but kind of like figures outside of the main story.
Yeah.
They're a little bit meta on the whole Cosmere.
I'm just excited that even Nas is playing a role in this story. We see him in a very different way that we have previously from the sample chapters that were read.
Do you want to head over to the next question? Because we have this, quote, "Is Dragonsteel, the metal, relevant?"
From Brandon, quote, "Dragonsteel, the metal, is relevant, but you're going to have to wait to see, end quote.
Whole bunch of speculation about the metal Dragonsteel. What does it do? Does it have magical properties?
I have to assume it does, but I don't think we have an idea of what exactly those properties are as of yet. And this concept of Dragonsteel has been floating around through the fandom, through the Cosmere for so long. I really am excited that it's finally going to make an appearance properly in a book, and we're going to learn something about it after having this buzzword and, you know, the name of the company, the name of an eventual novel, etc., finally presented to us.
What we do know, and why the questioner was being very explicit with like calling out Dragonsteel the metal, is that there is something about the actual dragon hide that has a metallic, and potentially that's like what's used as an ore to make the metal.
Seemingly, yeah, it comes from like the scales, or there's specifically,
Veins.
I think, spikes
Right.
on dragons. Maybe it's not their scales, it's like additional hide embellishment.
So we're going to get that answer, to be honest, sooner than I was maybe prepared for mentally, because this is coming out next year, and we'll at least have some answers about Dragonsteel the metal.
Yeah, it's at least going to be present in a story. We'll see how much we actually learn about it, but at least it will be there, and we can start our proper Dragonsteel journey.
Yes. If I was going to put out some speculation, I would imagine that the metal is a bit like atium or lerasium, but
yeah, a god metal.
But instead of being so powerful and kind of like overwhelming in its ability, it's dispersed through all dragonkind. So the power might be very useful or beneficial, but not as potent as something like a god metal would be.
I'm curious if it's something like an aluminum or a silver that gives them some kind of protection from
magic
investiture, manipulation.
That would be helpful. And as I mentioned up top, I think that there's plenty of dragons who would just want to hide from the chaos that was the shattering.
Maybe it gives them their long life.
Completely.
And maybe that's why Hoyd also has such a long life. Maybe he was able to ingest some dragon steel or something and make himself impervious.
So many fun thoughts. Let's go over to another question. We have this, quote, how big is Secret Project number 5?
Brandon said, quote, it is the biggest of the secret projects. I'd have to pull it open, but it is longer than any of the others, but not by a significant amount. I think my final draft was 120,000 words, something like that, end quote.
Biggest of the secret projects, and I didn't have any problem with the length of the secret projects.
Yeah. It's perfect. I'm so excited.
And when Brandon is committed to kind of being explicit with Cosmere hints and kind of like incorporating the broader Cosmere, it's going to be a wonder to see what he turns out.
Yeah, and in those circumstances, especially longer is better, in my opinion, so that the connections and integrations can really be done in a smooth way, and we're not trying to just jam everything in kind of awkwardly. So I would rather have this be longer rather than shorter.
Definitely. I want as much as possible.
Of course, always.
Let's
do a couple other kind of miscellaneous recent words of Brandon also, just to round out some of these new happenings in the fandom of the Cosmere. Someone asked a question that I actually was recently thinking, because we have shared this book with a friend. They asked, quote, will there be a Letherbound of Arcanum Unbounded, end quote.
And Brandon responds with, quote, yes, there will be. We're working on that. I think that might be the next one after Bands of Mourning. Maybe. That is our plan. It's not our plan to do any of the individual novellas as their own Letherbounds. So that means that we'll probably need to wait for Dawnshard until we do it into a collection. So you can get a Letherbound of that, end quote.
Great news. I will be really excited to have the Arcanum Unbounded as part of our collection.
I think that the Arcanum Unbounded also presents a opportunity for various artworks. We saw with the Sunlit Man three different artists kind of taking their view on that story and adding their beautiful creations to that Letherbound. But when we have multiple different novellas or short stories within the Arcanum Unbounded, and there's going to be maps from Nas, and oh my gosh, so many things.
That's what I was just thinking. I am curious if they will decide to update or embellish or add to the details that are currently offered in the Arcanum Unbounded, because each section starts with a custom essay from Chris about the planetary system. I'm really hoping that maybe those will be expanded with updated knowledge, or we'll get some really good maps and stuff for each section. That would be really exciting.
Yeah, I definitely love a good map. And let's now make a connection from the beginning to the end of these Words of Brandon, because this brings us back to what you were talking about, Indian mythology bringing and coming into the Cosmere.
Yeah.
The questioner says, quote, any more Indian mythology coming into the Cosmere, end quote.
Brandon replied, Kalyani and Raoul, who do our world building for that. Because my grasp of Indian mythology and things is, it's improving because they're helping me, but they have turned in a rough draft of their world guide for the Indian-inspired world of the Cosmere. So I do think that more is going to be coming in the future. End quote. And that is, as previously mentioned, in reference to the Aether, Prime Aether world.
Yeah, I definitely loved Twin Soul and thought that our conversation about the Lumarian Aethers and the Aether moons, some would say moon shrooms, others were more excited about the Prime Aether planet because Twin Soul let us know that there was a major destruction and kind of cataclysm on that world. We just have so many questions about how the Aethers fit into the Cosmere. Yes. Does it follow Twin Soul's claim that they are a separate source from Adenalsium and therefore all of the shards? How do those operate? We talked about convergent and parallel evolution. Where do the Aethers fit into the greater Cosmere? Clearly, we know that they are going to be important for the space age and the space era of the Cosmere. But I am just excited about another alien world with influences from the different mythologies and cultures of our own world. I think that we have seen, of course, really direct things. The Western motif of Wax and Wane in Era 2 is kind of just like straight up inspired by the American West, but I want a little bit more variation to make it more alien and also to kind of incorporate literally one of the deepest mythologies on planet Earth, the vast ton of Indian mythologies, and the way that because of their own history, they've just kind of like incorporated and blended and become new things and changed over time, but they're really kind of the same thing that connects back. And it's all supported by these wonderful stories.
Yeah, really epic.
Exactly. Really just battles of good and evil. And
so how cool to be able to incorporate these kinds of epic stories that exist in our world into an epic fantasy also. That's only going to increase your level of epicness.
Pretty soon we'll be at the 90s level of extreme epicness.
Yeah, with an X. I agree. I'm really excited to see some new inspiration for a world in the Cosmere. We haven't gotten really a deep, new alien world in a long time. I feel like Rashar was kind of the most recent, really new, different place because, as you said, Wax and Wane is in a very familiar landscape if you're at all familiar with American cowboy stories and things like that. And the secret projects didn't take us anywhere really strange and new. Plus, as standalones that are relatively short, there's not a whole ton of world building that's able to be done. So they all kind of have their unique features, but we don't really get to super dive into the world. And I'm very excited for this development and to see something different and new.
Unfortunately, we don't have a perfect timeline on when we are going to get all of that, but I think that the mention of Aethers in Isles of the Emberdark is only bringing their importance more into focus, and we're just going to keep getting evidence, whether it be Lumarian Aethers or Aethers from Datri, the prime Aether world. I just want to see more of that. I really loved watching Twin Soul work his Aether magic in the very brief scenes that we have in The Lost Metal. That book was doing a lot, and we don't want to go off on a tangent, but I felt that his introduction, the introduction of the Aethers, learning about the Aethers, was a small but notably well done bit of incorporating some of the extra Cosmere. And so to get a whole book about it, or more influences from that world, just very excited about the potential.
Final question is short but intriguing. Is Sabariel a Khandra?
And Brandon says, quote, Rapho, but don't hold your breath, end quote.
I never would have thought of this, but now I'm obsessed.
I think there was some speculation on the interwebs that would have fueled this question, but Sabariel kind of does stand out in a couple of ways. And I believe that Ulam's introduction in Tress may have kind of fueled, because Ulam kind of had a detachment that we associate a little bit with the Khandra, a little bit of like being above it. I mean, he was kind of arrogant in his knowledge, but Sabariel, in a world that's like going to war and constantly playing games of political one-upsmanship, he is just kind of like a little outside of it, but I don't think enough to make it make sense as a Khandra.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, though, and the concept of more and more Khandra capable of being off Scadrial as they were released from Harmony's direct control will just give us questions of, is this person a Khandra?
I wonder if there will be a Khandra in Isles of the Emberdark.
Yeah, the Cylons look like us now vibes could get real strong.
I'm pretty sure there's a mention of Sleepless.
There certainly is.
Also, can't wait to hear more, see more about the whole Sleepless situation, but we'll see if there are also Khandra.
Gosh.
I think this secret project is going to be big.
It's going to be big. It's going to be important. When you introduce the concept of Firefly, now that's all I see their ship as. It's just a ragtag group led by Starling and making their way from port to port, just keep on flying, get a job, get a crew.
Yeah, that it does have that vibe, I think.
I would love that. If Brandon is actually going to bring Firefly back onto the air via Isles of the Emberdark.
Yeah.
Just reintroduce the whole crew. We'll get a withered Nathan Fillion to be one of the members there.
That's rude. Don't call him withered.
Oh, but he's an old man now. He was like a sexy young guy when he was in Firefly. I think that it's now time for him to be at a different stage of his career. Just kidding. You can always be sexy Nathan Fillion to me. On that note, though, who would you like to see play Dusk and Starling in Isles of the Emberdark movie?
You can't just throw that question on me. I have no idea.
It's a hot take, last second question. All of the fans are welcome to jump into. Let us know who you imagine as your Dusk. Dusk has obviously existed before. Starling, a new character we don't know much about.
Yeah. I mean, Dusk should be like a Polynesian actor.
Love it. Makes a lot of sense for the background. And so, man, here's what I want. It doesn't work necessarily for Six of the Dusk, but I would really love Dante Bosco to play Dusk. And I know that he has a little bit more of like comedic chops. Everyone, hello, Zuko here. But I think that him playing a character that has kind of like a dark background,
sort of gruff demeanor.
Oh, from Rufio to Dusk. That's what I'm looking for my Dante Bosco in life. And I'll also just always use any moment to bring in some references to Avatar. And I just want them all crisscrossed up in that universe.
And then Starling is albino.
Yes, this is an important note. It said that albino humans often become, in their transformation,
albino dragons. She is a dragon
in
always,
their human form.
In her human form.
Yes, when they are in their human form and they are albino, then the transformation happens. It is normal for them to be an albino dragon, but it's only happened, I think, twice in dragon lore.
Yes, correct. So I don't know of any albino actors I think it would be cool to be able to get an albino actor. Obviously, you can cast someone who is not albino and make them look albino. And I don't know who I would choose. I don't know the character well enough yet to cast her properly.
Completely fair.
Ooh, I will say though, there is a character that is super briefly introduced in the sample chapters. She, I believe, is Dotrian, and I would love the actor who plays Inej in the Netflix adaptation of Shadows and Bone.
Oh, great call. Yeah, she's like a knife fighter in that. Oh, man.
She's so good. Again, I don't properly know the character in Isles of the Emberdark to say if that would be good casting, but she is the first face that came to my mind when I was introduced to the character.
I love that, and
I just want to see that actor do more things.
Exactly. Yeah. That's really what we want. So let us know if you have any hot takes on your Dusk casting or your Starling casting. Let us know if you recognized off the top where Emberdark was mentioned previously, and what are you most excited about when it comes to exploring this region of the cognitive realm and what mysteries it might entail.
Until next time, life before death,
strength before weakness,
journey before destination.